Hello, everybody. My name is Julian Randall. I am the author of Pilar Ramirez and the Escape from Zafa, which is out from Whole Books for Young Readers March 1st. Uh, my pronouns are he and they, and I'm from Chicago. That's pretty much everything that you need to know about me so that we can move on to the main event of the evening. We are here to celebrate Melissa de la Cruz and the release of the next book in the Never After series, The Stolen Slippers. Do you mind if I read your bio out real quick, just so I can let the
Sure.
people be in the presence of the legend?
Aw, thank you so much. I'm so honored to have you. I'm really excited about your book. So you're going to have to talk about it a little bit after because I want to hear all about it. It's funny because it was on my reading list and I was like, oh my God, it's the same Leon. So I'm so excited. Yay.
Word up. Thank you so much. All right, cool. So Melissa de la Cruz is the #1 New York Times, #1 Publishers Weekly, and #1 indie-bound best-selling author of many critically acclaimed and award-winning novels for readers of all ages, and edited the inspiring anthology of true stories, Because I Was a Girl. She grew up in Manila and moved to San Francisco with her family, where she graduated high school salutatorian from the Convent of the Sacred Heart. At Columbia University, she majored in art history and English. Melissa de la Cruz lives in West Hollywood with her husband and her daughter. Melissa, I'm so hyped to be here with you today. I'm so grateful to Barnes & Noble and Macmillan for curating this space. How are you feeling today? Let's just start off with that.
Oh my God, I've been up since 3 a.m. and this makeup is 13 hours old because I did my media tour this morning. And yeah, but I'm very energized. It's always exciting to have a new book out. And I'm really excited about this book in particular. Both of these books came out in the pandemic. So it's kind of a different experience. Usually they send you out and you get to meet all your readers and you're kind of exhausted by being in airports all the time. You have a cold. So it's kind of nice that we're able to do this virtually, although I do miss seeing everybody and meeting everyone. Yeah.
I feel that's super heavy, especially like now it's like gonna be the first book that I've put out in the pandemic. So speaking of those books, what inspired you to write this series, the Never After series?
So after I wrote the Descendants series, which is, Disney's fairy tale universe, I realized I wasn't done in the fairy tale world, and I still had stories that I wanted to tell, but not necessarily, in the Disney world, kind of my take on them. And I came up with Never After. It's really funny. It's like such a long, convoluted story, but people always ask, how do you get ideas? How does this happen? So I was reading Us Weekly, and there was a story about the actors who played Jon Snow and Ygritte from Game of Thrones. And I don't know if you watched Game of Thrones or anybody out there, but so in Game of Thrones, Jon Snow and Ygritte have a very tragic, sad ending where she dies. They don't end up together. But in Us Weekly, the actors who played them were getting married. And I was filled with so much happiness that, oh my God, Jon Snow and Ygritte in an alternate universe were together. And that actually sparked the idea of, well, what if, there were two worlds, and in one world there was all this sadness, but in this other world, the story takes on a different ending, a different flavor. And it started out as a YA book, and as I developed the book for about 3 years, and in the end, it kind of became a fairy tale book, and that was more middle grade and lost the romance. So that's how ideas go from, idea to final execution. So it's a little bit different, but what I kept from it was the real life and, kind of this kind of fantasy world colliding. So it's a little bit fairy tales meets Lord of the Rings.
Right up. Yeah, no, I mean that vibe comes through so strongly, and I love that detail that it's the of course it's Jon Snow. Jon Snow, see, like forever seeding the next world, forever seeding the next season, even in our hearts.
Absolutely.
So as you're coming to this realization that you weren't necessarily done with fairy tales, I'm curious, what was the first fairy tale that kind of came to your mind as in terms of which ones you wanted to remix?
So Sleeping Beauty, which I retold in the first Never After book, I believe that that's pretty much my favorite fairy tale. I really love the story Sleeping Beauty. And my take on it is actually based on the original, which is a much darker and much more sinister and does not have a happy ending. So the Brothers Grimm wrote the Sleeping Beauty story, but there was always Sleeping Beauty 2. And in Sleeping Beauty 2, after she wakes up, marries the prince, she has, a family, but then his mother turns out to be an ogre and eats her children, eats Sleeping Beauty's kids, and then frames her son for the murder of the babies and of Sleeping Beauty. I mean, it's this really dark, sad story. So, when I was cackling, I was like, oh, this is so great. I'm going to use it. And I thought, well, what if, because knowing this is a real story of Sleeping Beauty, what if the evil fairy wasn't evil at all and was actually trying to save Sleeping Beauty from that future? So that was the first book. And then in the second book, which is based on my second favorite fairy tale, Cinderella, I always felt bad for the two wicked stepsisters, and I always thought, maybe there's some reason why they are so maligned in the story. So it's a little bit of a twist where Cinderella is not quite the heroine we thought she was. And perhaps the evil stepsisters are the ones who deserve our sympathy.
Word up. I think that I had heard once that they were like, no, like the ending of Sleeping Beauty for real, canonically, super dark. Super dark.
So dark.
So dark. Like almost like so many of them have endings like that, which kind of brings me to my question about what was your research process like as you were trying to figure out what tales fit into the narrative that I'm trying to move forward in my own right, which I'm going to save that other part for the next question. But yeah, I want to know a little bit more about the research process as you were putting this together, deciding, okay, which details do I keep? Which details do I tweak?
Yeah, it's definitely just kind of I do a lot of research and I learn about the stories and, I read the source material. And then I kind of just instinctively just keep what I want to keep and kind of dismiss what, I'm very unafraid to cut things that I don't need, and I do that with my books that are based on history with Alex and Eliza too. I did all the research. I read Elizabeth Schuyler's biographies. I read the Alexander Hamilton book and I read the letters and a lot of the source material. And then I decided, I'm going to make a story from this part of the history, but then I'm going to make up this part, and I don't know if it's just confidence or just, I think you have to serve the story. And one of the things that I remember, really kind of arguing in my head with Lin-Manuel about was because in his take of Hamilton, Alexander and the sister Angelica, kind of had this a little bit of a love story too. And when I read all the source material and I read the biographies, I thought there's just no way that ever happened. They were sisters. She loved, Elizabeth and, she loved Angelica. I mean, and I really told people, he doesn't have a sister. He doesn't know what sisters are like. That's never going to happen, with how close they were. But that's my version of the history. So with the fairy tales, I took that darkness and I made it, my Never After series is funny. So I was like, well, what's really funny? And I think, ogres are funny and trolls are funny. So I thought it was kind of funny that she gets eaten.
Fair enough. I love that. Some things you were saying earlier about, just not being particularly tepid or shy about cutting the things that you don't need, keeping the things that you do. And that got me thinking about just, this is a question that I'm always curious about with everybody who's put together a book, no matter where in the trajectory it is for them. What was the hardest edit of this book in terms of something that you need to put in, something you needed to take out, in terms of just what was the hardest part?
So in The Stolen Slippers, there's a moment where they're kind of in the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale, and they're trapped, in a gingerbread house full of candy. And one of my favorite jokes about it is, they're a bunch of 12-year-olds and they're prisoners in a house full of candy. An adult would be like, oh my God, get me out of here. But 12-year-olds, and I had a 12-year-old when I was writing the book, they would be so psyched. They're like, yes, we're trapped in a house full of candy. We're going to eat all the candy we can eat. So I kind of had a lot of chapters in this gingerbread house and a lot about the candy. And my editor was like, okay, we've spent a lot of time in the candy house. Can we kind of move on? Like what part of the plot is this, important to? So there was just stuff like that where I get really, kind of into certain things, like they say, kill your darlings. It's always way too fun to describe all the various candy treats. And I think what I was struggling with, the plot for me comes at the end a little bit. Like I do outline, but I also feel like even if you outline, you want to be surprised, like your reader is surprised, right? So, even as I'm writing it, new things will come up, or I'll be like, oh no, I have to do this. And, I think I ended up writing a lot more kind of the mythological arc of what happened before and never after than I thought I was. I think I figured out part of the big mythology while writing this book. So.
For sure. Right up. Before I move to my next question, just want to say that we do have, for all people who are attending, the Q&A is open in the chat. There will be a time where I will read out those questions for all of us, and that will be very exciting. And, if you want to be able to do that and look at the signed copy of The Stolen Slippers that's going to arrive courtesy of your ticket today, now would be a great time to put in a question so you can have some... what's the word that I'm looking for here? Nostalgia. So,
but Julian, I want to hear about your upcoming middle grade book, and I know it's based on Dominican mythology and kind of an adventure fantasy series. So, what part of the mythologies did you use? What did you dismiss? Did you make up stuff? Like, was the process the same for you?
Yeah. So the process started, as most things do, with me calling my mom and being like, I have this opportunity. I had like a general idea of what Pilar wanted and kind of like where I wanted to get her to, which in this context was that Pilar is an aspiring documentary filmmaker. She's from the same block in Chicago that I'm from, which is the rapidly gentrifying and/or fully gentrified Logan Square. She's on the northwest side of Chicago. But yeah, so she's from the same block that I'm from, and she's trying to make a documentary about her cousin who disappeared during the Trujillato 50 years ago. And along the way, she ends up she's trying to meet this professor. She touches this piece of paper, but the minute she touches the piece of paper, she falls through, and she finds that she's on an island of Dominican mythos and magic called Zafa, where it turns out that El Cuco, the Dominican boogeyman, has had her cousin the entire time because him and Trujillo were in cahoots. So the original first question was that I was like, all right, I know that Trujillo and El Cuco being in cahoots just feels right to me in terms of they have similar goals. How could we create a parallel of this dictator without letting the dictator sing on the hook? So that was the first thing, was kind of taking this tip from, I want to say Shane McCrae. Shane McCrae, who's an amazingly gifted poet, has a book of poems. It's not the case, but a book of poems called In the Language of My Captor, where he has a number of poems where Jefferson Davis is talking, because the section is dealing with his adopted mulatto son that I did not know about. But the reason that I bring that up is because in those poems, Jefferson Davis only ever speaks in dreams. That's the only times that you ever hear his voice. He's imagining this thing, but it's always him asleep and prone and whatnot. But I thought to myself, okay, in the same vein, how do I bring the legacy of this violent historical figure into this context, but not allow them to access to the same level of power and agency that they had previously in order to dictate the story in the direction that I needed it to. So that was the first part, was just trying to figure out what is a good parallel for this, and El Cuco just snapped into my mind. I think the other part that was most fun to rewrite was the idea that there's more than one Ciguapa. In Dominican mythology, La Ciguapa is this incredibly beautiful woman creature who has like backwards facing feet. So no matter where you're trying to follow her, she's actually going in the opposite direction.
Oh,
And
wow.
looking at that, I was like, oh, okay, what would the application of this be
Yeah.
in a larger context? Number one, the idea that anytime a man has ever told me that there's only one of something, mentiroso. Second of all, and perhaps more importantly, that sounds to me like a spy. So from that, Carmen started to like take shape, and Carmen ends up being Pilar's kind of guide as she's moving through this world, so that we, as the reader, is like being taken along on this kind of fish out of water journey. So yeah, I think that was kind of like the first two priorities in terms of like figuring out like what are the stakes of this mythology and what symbolically and like plot wise do I want them to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I'm so excited. And I'm not sure what there's some kind of somebody's mic is is on. I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm hearing some weird, a little bit of weird sounds. So
Oh, word.
yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, I am so excited to read your book, and I'm so excited to be lost in Dominican mythology. And I think that's so fascinating to go, to use, even the history and, talking to your mom. I mean, it's so fun when that's all, in the work that we do.
Yeah. You gotta use your primary sources.
Absolutely.
All right, what was the... Oh, I'm getting a note from Brittany. Okay, cool. We can start getting into these Q&As. Oh my gosh, there's such a fun little folder of these. Fantastic.
I know. I just noticed it myself. I'm like, oh, you think after 2 years of doing Zoom, presentations that we would know all these.
Absolutely. All right, so here's one. What advice do you have for BIPOC writers trying to get their first books published?
I think my advice is kind of the same for any writer, and then I'll kind of talk about the specifics for BIPOC. For any writer, I always say, just keep trying, keep on knocking on that door until it opens. I mean, I got so many rejections when I was starting out. I was rejected from MFA programs, to be a creative writing MFA. I was rejected by publishers. I had tried to sell 2 novels before I finally sold my third. So my first novel that came out was actually the third novel that I'd written. And I just didn't give up. It took about, I always say it took 11 years to get published because I wanted to, wait. So I wanted to get published ever since I was 11. And then I sold my book when I was 27. But at 27, I was really bitter because I'd been trying full time since I was 22. Since I graduated from college, I was like, I'm going to sell my book now. I'm going to be a full-time writer. And it did not happen. And I was, kind of on the cusp of giving up, honestly. And I sent my book out and I thought, okay, well, if this doesn't sell, then it's just not meant to be. And my agent sold it in 2 weeks to Simon & Schuster. So that was kind of exciting. I know I always say it was the third happiest day of my life after my wedding and the birth of my child. But since my husband and my kid are not here right now, I don't have to lie. It was the happiest day of my life when I sold my first book.
That's what I'm talking about.
And then for BIPOC authors, I'm really so excited about how the culture has moved on and accepted us and accepted our stories. And I think there's so much opportunity right now. When I was starting out, I remember in my pitch document, I said I wanted to be like Amy Tan because she was the only commercial author that I knew, who was Asian. There were other authors who were Asian, but were probably more, I would say, not as commercial, like more literary, maybe more obscure. But I wanted to write for the big general public. So, and right now people are hungry for these stories. for stories that even I was trying to sell 20 years ago that nobody was interested in. So I think right now is a really good time. And also, to think like specifically about what story you want to tell, about your culture, about your background, that's meaningful to you, and that's unique as well. So.
Right. Yeah, I don't have much I don't have much more to add about that besides the fact that get weird. Like, by all means, please get weird, because there are as many ways to be 12 years old as there are 12-year-olds. Somebody out there needs this specific story because it opens them to the possibility of what this is the year for. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So whatever is your expansive, I don't know, I don't think anybody would ever really want to read a book about a slam team from Saturn. Do it. Why not?
Absolutely. No, I feel the same way. That's why I'm specific, particular, special, something that only you can tell.
Okay, here's a larger question. This one's for you, Melissa. How many books are you planning on having in the Never After series?
So right now we have contracted for 5. And I think at least this story in Never After will probably be 5 books. Because I have other ideas for other stories and other series in the world. But for this particular series with Philomena, Jack, Alistair, and Gretel, I believe there will be 5 books. Yes.
Right up. On that actually on the tip of Gretel, because I am also curious about this. What happened to Gretel's suitcases?
Did I forget about them? I thought at one point I had Alistair come and get them. And I do think I did try to keep track of it. So I believe that I mentioned that she has them. She definitely had them in the palace. I don't know how they got there.
I'm just scrolling through. Sorry, with a bit of inspiration. This one's also for you, Melissa. Growing up in the Philippines, have you ever thought about writing about Filipino mythology?
I have, and I finally figured out what I wanted to do with that, because there are so many different myths and so many different legends that you could incorporate. But I sold a duology called The Encanto's Daughter to Penguin, and that is coming out not next year, but I think 2024. So that incorporates not just Filipino mythology, but Spanish mythology. And it's a fairy mythology. So when you grow up in the Philippines, even though my parents, were urbane, educated, metropolitan people, the Philippines is just steeped in superstition. And so I grew up with, a dad who would say, okay, you got to bow to the duendes, make sure that the spirits don't, so there's always these house spirits that are hiding your keys or causing mischief. And, they were very, my dad would mention that, or we would, we believed in ghosts, or, it was just, you just grow up with a lot more kind of supernatural flavor and superstition. So that felt very natural to me. So it was almost hard to pick what I wanted to do. But one of the things I always wanted to do, so I had an idea of, I wanted to kind of write a Pride and Prejudice with fairies, about social status within the fantasy world. And I'd been talking about this for 10 years. I was I want to write really social kind of Downton Abbey book, but with fairies, and then I was I discovered this Filipino myth. And I was I can do that with this idea that I want to do. So it's kind of this crazy court fairy Filipino thing. So
I love that. I love everything about that. Because sorry, just to briefly tack on, this is the same thing that I was saying about Dominican mythology, right?
Yeah.
That the history of the Dominican supernatural is inextricable from the history of Dominican oppression, right? That we look at Trujillo, and Trujillo's able to convince people that in this place where it's routinely 100 and like set 108 some degrees or something like that, that he never sweats. That he needs that myth of himself in order to like make people think that he has this godlike power, right? And then it ultimately, like though the power and the mythology of DR is like in its people. It's always and it's always and it's everywhere, and it's so deeply into all of these like different little things that we do around the house, around each other. There's no way that it's not going to affect people. So honestly, it almost doesn't feel like the supernatural. It just feels like another form of energy, in the same way that it's like earth, water, air, fire, magic. Like all of these things come together, at least for me.
Absolutely. And, sometimes it is sad when I think about, when we immigrated to America, how different it was. It's almost like you leave that kind of atmosphere. It's because not everybody is the same, and doesn't know the same myths and superstitions, so yeah, you lose something, but anyway.
Yeah. Any of these? Sorry, some of these are kind of like similar structure. Oh, okay. Here's one. How do you structure your writing day? I think this one's for both of us.
Oh, great. So I used to write at night, and I was a night owl and also a procrastinator. So the whole day would go by, 5 p.m. would arrive. I had not done nothing. So I would start writing, at 5. So from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. was when I would write, because it was quiet. And I really like the quiet, because now that we have the internet, now that we have so many distractions, it's kind of nice to write at night, because then there's not as many people online. There's not as many things that are popping up. So that was how I wrote for the first, I would say 10 years of my career. And then I had a baby and I had a kid, and I couldn't write at night because I had to be awake for the baby, and I was exhausted, after, a whole day with the kid, and I had a nanny, and, all of that, but it was still, I just couldn't do it anymore. So I actually forced myself to learn how to write during work hours. So now I write from about 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then I have a little bit of a lunch break. And depending on how big the lunch was, either I take a nap and it's all over, or, if I'm on deadline, I go back to work with a lot of caffeine. So it's hard to say what a regular writing day is, because when things aren't due and I'm kind of in the outline phase or the first draft phase, it's kind of 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. But if I'm like at the end phase where I have to finish the book and everything has to make sense, which sometimes only happens at the last the last 2 weeks of writing the book, right? I mean, you're kind of writing this fever and trying, getting everything done, and, kind of clicking, everything's clicking, that's when I work 16 hours a day. But a regular kind of nice day is about that, that really nice morning chunk. How about you?
Yeah, I think that like I've also like seen that it kind of shifts with this. It kind of shifts with the seasons. I've been thinking a lot about how when you're from Chicago, all of the things that you do are just like so affected by the weather. Like right now, it's like there's an amount of snow outside that I don't know what the number is, but the number is disrespectful. And so as a result, like it got like super dark really early here today. So I can't, I love this office very much, but it doesn't get a tremendous amount of natural light. So I'm working out at the table, which generally means that I'm working earlier in the morning because I'm trying to like get that like extra boost of the sun. Because if I'm working at night in the winter time, then it's just like, it's harder for me to, I find it harder for me to focus.
Yeah.
Overalls, but generally during the summer, I'm in here from 10:30 in the morning until about 5 at night. And whatever gets done in that time period is what is going to get done. I try to hit a daily. Oh no, are you frozen? Okay, you're good. Yeah, no, I try to hit a daily word count because I think that it is nice to have that goal in your head I think that it's important, and it took me a long time to learn not to let that compile, because that's a way that Daniel Jose Older tells us that like writing begins with forgiveness, right? And like one of the main things that always stops writing production is shame. And there's a way that the daily word count allows me to be consistently in conversation with the work, even if the work is not necessarily what I would like for it to be. And I think that I'm at my most forgiving in that context. And I think that that's one thing that, like, now that I'm coming up on, good Lord, 11 years, working at some capacity on like, I want to do writing in like a serious way. Coming up on my 11 years. It took me until just about now to realize that the writing habits that I had curated at the beginning were just not necessarily serving the things that I needed to do right now. So I think that that's one big thing to like all of the future writers, current writers, folks who are asking about writing in the group chat, is I think that also to think about your process as like kind of like you were saying, in terms of like your life circumstances change and you had to adjust. I think that there's a way that we talk about process as a destination rather than like an ongoing, process. And if your process is shifting beneath your feet, it doesn't mean that you're losing your gift. Your gift is just taking a different shape.
I mean, absolutely. And it's amazing how psychological writing is, and how scary it is to face your work and face yourself, because you never feel like you're good enough. Never, and so it's just this terror of writing, and then you write it and it's not so bad and you can always fix it. So it's just getting over that hump of yourself, and I like that, the forgiveness. Yeah, it's never going to be as perfect as it is in your head, but you still got to put it down anyway.
Truly, you cannot edit an empty page.
Yep.
Got a lot of Rapunzel buzz in the chat. Wondering whether there's a Rapunzel remix, a Rapunzel appearance forthcoming.
Rapunzel is not one of my favorite fairy tales, so I don't think it really comes up that much. We'll see. Maybe I'll find something interesting about it that I'll want to do. But yeah, no plans on Rapunzel as yet. So
another person would like to ask us, which character do you relate to the most?
So in Never After, there's a part of me in all of my characters. Philomena is definitely a lot like me as a kid. I was definitely a kid who read a lot and who was scared of people and, was bullied. And I wanted to write for that kid, for that awkward, and sad little 12-year-old I was, whose best friends were in books. And I don't think I'd done that before in any of my books. So I think that was, a way to forgive myself, because I was very ashamed of being that person. Everybody, in our culture, you like the extroverted, sportsy, kind of extrovert out there, somebody who's very confident. And that's, who our heroes tend to be. And I was never that person, even now, I would be picked last at everything. Do not want me on your dog team. We would be out in 1 second. So I wanted to write about a kid like that. And then, but because it's a little painful, I don't know if she's my favorite because it's so close, And then Gretel is definitely like me a lot in her love for fashion. She's kind of frivolous. I always say Gretel, right, was me when I was confident, in my 20s. I'm probably the most like Alistair. I'm kind of goofy. And I kind of have a little bit of a sidekick personality. So I'm actually probably the Alistair. My friends would probably say I'm the most like Alistair. Jack is just my hero, so I love Jack.
Yeah, I love that. Wow. Yeah, for me, I think that if I take the time to cut my life kind of in terms of childhood, adulthood, arbitrary line, but if I divide it like that, Pilar is very much like we would have been best friends as kids. Absolutely and truly. I definitely would have wanted to be like her sound guy or like the dude who like writes the narration scripts to her documentaries. We would have been very close in terms of just the fact that, you know, she's brave and like brave and very sarcastic, but like inquisitive and wants very badly to kind of just like piece things together and is not amenable to things not making sense. That part I definitely took from 12-year-old me. I think that like more than anything else, like in terms of things that were annoying me at 12, like what was really eating at me, it was like the illogic of puberty. That like things were not like, it wasn't just things were changing. It was that things were changing in ways that did not seem at all productive. Like, how is it helping anybody for me to be sweaty? How I ask you. But I think that for who I am now, La Bruja is probably like the closest probably the closest analog in terms of like a little more reclusive than she was in her like younger years. And like there's some level of sarcasm that verges into a bitterness around a hurt that has happened in her life. But overall, generally just kind of like an older version of Toph from Avatar, The Last Airbender, aka one of the greatest series ever made.
Aww.
Ooh, this is a fun one. Is there a place I can send Never After fan art? And also, what happened to the lamp?
I think the lamp was useless at the end because they'd used up all the wishes. I got to make sure. I'm pretty sure that's
I'm pretty sure because the genie like then like dips out and is like, all right, well that was my last one. That's why I was like, hey, let's pick this up.
You know, once there's no genie, there's really no magic in the lamp. So, and I had a really much more convoluted plot line with the lamp that I just could not make work. And my editor was like, it's just too confusing, Mel. So I couldn't do that. I had a whole, which I got to do a little bit of it, and I can't even get into it because even I am a little confused by what I wanted to do. But yeah, no, the lamp is useless because there's no genie anymore. So it's just, you know, an empty oil lamp. And Never After fan art. I mean, you can always email it to my publishers. I'm a lot more available on TikTok. I don't have a public email anymore because it just got way too hard to respond to everybody. I used to have, my dad used to be my assistant and my sister used to be my assistant. My dad passed away, sadly. He enjoyed answering the fan mail. And my sister got a real job. So she's not my assistant anymore. So it was just too hard to keep up with all the mail. And I really liked responding because my dad, when he would do it, you know, would always say, oh, what about this? What about this? So I'm sorry. That doesn't happen anymore. I don't know. Maybe we should have something on the website where people can send it in. I would love to see it. I love seeing fan art. I know, right? So good. I love it.
If I ever get any, it's going to be the wildest day of my life.
Oh, you will, dude. Do not worry. It will happen.
No doubt. This one's, here's one. Why do you love to write?
You know, because I think I love to read, and I love to read, and it was the only thing I really liked to do. Like I said, I was a quiet kid. I was, you know, an outsider, and I was much more comfortable with books than anything else. And then I think I wanted to be part of that conversation. So I love to read. And then I thought, I love these so much. I want to make these things that I love. So I think that's why I love to write. Some days I don't love it so much, you know. So, you know, you get what you wish for, or be careful, you know, getting what you wish for. But I always, you know, it's really fun. I like to entertain myself. I amuse myself. You know, I laugh when I write my books, or I feel what my characters feel. So I think it is a way to express, you know, what's inside. That's what creative people do, you know. Why do you love to write, Julian?
Right. So I am looking at one of the few picture frames that is on my desk because it's mostly occupied with staplers and remotes. But this is the first framed thing that I ever got of my nephew Dominic when he was
Oh,
first born from the hospital. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. Uh, so the great part about, I mean, there's so many great parts about having a new baby into your life, but one of the great things was when he first like started to like speak in ways that were that were kind of narrative. Like I'd ask him how his day was, and he would have like a response rather than just kind of like gurgling in my general direction. Uh, and I think for me, it's that process is kind of similar to that in watching him like learn how to recap and talk. I started to learn more about like what are the things he notices, how is this different from what I would think was important about it, because the thing is like he's going through the stories and then and then and then it's gone on for like 20 minutes, and like the moral of the story is that he saw a grape, like, but all of these details are so important to him. And for me, characters are very much like that in the opening going of it. They kind of see things the way that I see them, which is that I'm trying to explore the world and I'm explaining the trees here and this there. And then eventually they start to like settle into this space where you see like, oh, there's like a real, like recognizable like person in here who has a system of like logic and things that I am interested in that they're completely uninterested in. I mean, shoot, Pilar's like first chapter starts with her kind of like getting after me about my narrative style, because she's saying like I'm doing that thing that I hate in other people's movies. I'm other people, starting the story in the middle when I should be starting at the beginning. And I was like, oh wow, okay, cool. Like it took like half a page, and now you're here. Let's talk. What's up? What you been up to? And I love that. I love especially in this time where I only really get to talk to like 8, 9 people a day about like non work or hey, I need another can of brisk iced tea. That's about the long and the short of my interactions daily. But I had an opportunity to speak with all of these like very rich people who at one point were just kind of made up, and now they are only kind of made up.
they definitely take on a life of their own.
This is a great one. They've all been great. I'm really excited about this one because I'm curious about it too. Do you ever feel bad for what you put your characters through?
No. No, I mean, I really like torturing them. I mean, if you don't torture them, there's no story, and I think it's kind of fun. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, some things sometimes when you try to write something and it just doesn't work out, the characters aren't, don't have any chemistry, or the plot, the story's just not working. And you're like, okay, fine, I can't do that. And then you delete everything. Like we said, the characters have a life of their own. So if you're trying to make them do something that isn't central to who they are, your story's not going to work. But yeah, no, I never feel bad. I think I've been too kind. I think we need to put them through worse.
Fair enough. I think for me, I feel bad. No, but I do feel sad when they tell me more about the kind of like, as I learn more about their backgrounds, like kind of like what are the joys that motivate them, what are the hurts that motivate them. When they tell me about the hurts that they've gone through, at some level, I feel like a little sad because I'm like, this kind of came from my mind and it kind of happened to you. And I'm saddened about that. I think that sometimes I get the reveal on the background of a character who I've been working with for a while once we've started to get intimate and get to know each other a bit. And that part's hard. But in terms of like day to day, like this situation is stressful, I am also stressed writing it. We're all stressed, Pilar. We just gotta keep pushing through, honey. I don't know what to tell you.
You just gotta keep going. You gotta keep going.
This book is due and you need to get home. So the only way out is through.
That's right.
When it's come to revising your novels, how different is the published draft from your first draft?
It's pretty different, right? I mean, that I think there was one book of the 60 books that I've written that came right from the outline, was perfect, and then went into copy editing with very minimal changes. And I wrote it when I was pregnant. So I think there was just like this pregnant fairy, made things easier, on me. But everything else, a first draft is a first draft and you got to revise it. And sometimes that means a structural revise where you actually have to tear your book apart and put it back together and write new things and then shove them in and, make your story work. There's a lot of that stuff that is pretty invisible. People think that we write chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but it's really not like that. It's like you write chapter 1, 2, 3. Oh, wait, chapter 14 should be in chapter 7. And, chapter 23 just like there's like a huge kind of like structuring sometimes. And that's like a huge revise. If you have a structural changes, that's hard because that means your outline did not hold up and you've got to redo that book. With Blue Bloods, with the new Blue Bloods book that's coming out in July, my editor just said this whole section has got to go. And it was this kind of flashback section that I'd written, set in another time that I was really into because it was set in Charleston and I really liked it. And she was like, it's not really adding anything to the novel. It's got to go. I was like, so, you take out 75 pages and then your book has that 75-page hole that you now must fill with new story. So, yeah, it's very different.
It's been interesting. The first Pilar novel was like, generally the guidelines that I was given is like shoot for somewhere between like 50 and 65,000 words. And I was over by like 70. And I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Because all of it's super important, all of it's super necessary. And then, of course, my miraculous wizard of an editor, Brian, got that go through and just like casually removed like 7,000 words that I just did not miss. So I think that was one major shift in and of itself, which is kind of like, let's bring the like kind of swelling down so we can see what we're actually working with here. And once we got through that, the thing that I am always very grateful for my relationship with Brian is that I think that sometimes when I'm writing a 12 or like 13-year-old, I remember too closely what life was like at like 12, 13, like not being allowed to do this, not being allowed to do that. And still feeling sometimes that like lack of permission, like governing me during the like editorial process. And Brian is there to say like, nah, she's the protagonist. She can absolutely go off and do that. She can absolutely go off and like make this decision. It doesn't have to be handed to her from like the adults or the experts in the situation. She can put these things together. I have faith in her. And then that gives me more faith that like my characters actually can resolve the puzzles that I've laid out in front of them. They don't need me to hand them the answers as well, which I think is like a really nice thing in terms of just like seeing how the drafts come together. I can't say any specifics, otherwise there will be spoilers, and I cannot allow for spoilers. Okay, so we got time for 1 to 2 more questions. So I'm going to take this one. Have you ever written in verse? If so, is it an option?
So my dog just walked in. So there's Mimi. Say hi, Memes. Have I ever written in verse? My dream was to be a poet. So I'm really jealous that you are one. I wanted to be a poet, and I had sent my poetry to the New Yorker, and I got this really great rejection letter that said, not this time, but keep sending us poems. And I kept sending them poems, and nothing ever happened. But yeah, maybe one day. I think that would be a fun thing to do. And you've published poetry books.
Yeah. So that's where my like original roots kind of come from as a poet.
Yeah.
Why this whole novel thing has been such a cool, awesome trip. It's like a vacation to a part of town that I live in the town, but I've never seen this part. This part is huge. Yeah, that's kind of where my roots come from. I come from slam, and then eventually like went on. I got an MBA. In terms of like my like fiction and like character work, I am working on something that incorporates some verse, and I also have a short story that I'm working on that like might turn into a series down the line. But honestly, right now I'm juggling as many I'm juggling as many books as I can, and my wonderful partner has been there to occasionally put her hand on my shoulder and be like, "All right, maybe we just put this one in the future projects folder and call it a day."
Yep, I would like some attention.
So it is.
Yep.
All right, I'm being signaled that we are out of time. So I just wanted to say first, thank you to our attendees. Thank you for being here. I hope that y'all enjoy your copy of The Stolen Slippers as much as I'm enjoying mine. Those will be arriving to you. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions and for being here. And thank you to Barnes & Noble. Thank you to Macmillan for bringing us together. And of course, thank you to you, Melissa, for two among a bevy of incredible books and for sitting a spell with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julian. But also tell them when your book is coming out. It's coming out next month. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, less than from now. Every once in a while, it really gets to me. But no, Pilar Diaz and the Escape from Zafa, book 1 drops March 1st, 2022 from Hope Books for Young Readers. Pre-order link is in the chat and also in my social media page. Speaking of which, Melissa, where can the people find you if they want to keep up?
So I am at melissa-delacruz.com, and I'm on authored Melissa Delacruz on TikTok and Instagram.
Wonderful. And I am at Julian the Poet. That's my first name, JulianThePoet. And I think that's everything. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you. Mimi said bye.
Bye, Mimi.
Bye.